Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Murmurs, where dreams melt into shadows and stories float through your sleep. Videos to fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying. Tonight's tale, The Bed That Waits for No One. Let's begin. The night had always carried a stillness in the town of Marrow's End, a quiet so deep that even the wind seemed to lose its way among the empty fields. And beyond the town's last crooked street, past the crumbling stone bridge and the abandoned orchard, there stood a house no one dared approach after dusk, a house sagging under the weight of forgotten years, its windows like blind eyes staring into a darkness that was thicker, heavier than night itself. And inside that house, in a room on the third floor, there waited a bed that belonged to no one and yet was never truly empty. It was a heavy old thing, crafted from blackened wood, the headboard carved with twisting shapes that no one could quite recognize, shapes that seemed to shimmer and shift when caught in the corner of one's eye. And the mattress, though covered in thick layers of dust, always looked as if it had just been laid out for someone expected to arrive. But no one in Marrow's End spoke of it openly, and those who had ventured close enough to see the house, to glimpse that dim window on the third floor, often said they felt something patient, watching, waiting. The stories had grown over time, whispered by firelight and tucked into the folds of warnings given to wide-eyed children. Tales of how the bed would call to you if you wandered too near, how it would whisper your name through the cracks in the wood, how once you laid down upon it, even for a moment, you would never quite get up again. But as with all old stories, most dismissed it as nonsense, old superstition clinging to a town already half forgotten by the world. But then came the newcomers, the people who did not grow up with the stories tucked under their pillows. And it was one such newcomer, a woman named Eliza Granger, who had purchased the rotting estate for little more than a handful of coins and a promise that she would leave the townsfolk well enough alone. And she, unlike the others, was not afraid of the tales, not burdened by the invisible chains of history that clung to the town's original families. Eliza was an archivist by trade, a seeker of hidden things, and the house, with its labyrinth of rooms and its long-forgotten library, had called to something deep inside her. And so, on the first night she crossed the threshold, she lit a single candle against the yawning darkness and made her way up the sagging stairs, her footsteps muffled against the worn wood, her breath curling in the cold air as she moved deeper into the house's hollow chest. The third floor was colder than the rest, and as she reached the top of the stairs, she felt a strange pressure in her chest, as though the air itself had thickened, grown heavy with expectation. But she shook off the feeling and pushed open the nearest door, revealing the room she would come to know too well in the days that followed. The bed sat in the center, angled toward the narrow window that peered out over the orchard, its dark frame looming against the pale walls. And Eliza paused, candle trembling slightly in her hand, a shiver crawling up her spine. Though no wind stirred the musty curtains, she approached cautiously, drawn despite herself, feeling a low hum in her bones, a strange vibration that seemed to emanate from the bed itself. She told herself it was just the cold, just the way old houses played tricks on the mind. But still, she hesitated before reaching out, fingers brushing the edge of the blanket that covered the mattress, the fabric surprisingly soft under the layer of dust, almost warm, almost breathing. She snatched her hand back, heart pounding in her ears. And for a moment, just a moment, she thought she heard something. A whisper, so faint it could have been her own breath, calling her name from the darkness under the bed. Eliza laughed nervously, shaking her head and turned away, vowing she would have the place cleaned up in the morning, vowing she would not let an old bed frighten her. But as she stepped out into the hall, the candlelight flickering wildly against the peeling wallpaper, she failed to notice the faint impression forming on the mattress, as though an unseen figure had just lain down, sinking slightly into the waiting bed. That night she dreamed of the orchard, but it was not the orchard as it had been. It was wild and tangled, the trees blackened and split, their branches clawing at a sky that churned with heavy, heavy roiling clouds. And in the center of it all stood the bed, naked and exposed under the open sky, the sheets fluttering like dying birds in a wind that had no direction, no mercy. And from the bed came a voice, soft and low, calling her name, beckoning her closer, closer still, until she could see that something was moving under the covers, something shifting, writhing, waiting. She woke with a gasp, the room around her cold as a crypt, the shadows clinging to the corners, and though she could hear no sounds beyond the pounding of her own heart, she could feel it, the pull, the slow, inevitable tug drawing her toward the third floor, toward the waiting bed. The days that followed blurred together in a slow drip of time, each one colder than the last, and each night she dreamed the same dream, each time the voice growing louder, the thing under the bed covers more restless. And though she tried to avoid the third floor, tried to confine herself to the lower rooms, she found herself drifting, almost against her will, back to that narrow staircase, back to the door that seemed to breathe in the stillness. One night, as the candle gutters low and the shadows press in tight, she stands before the door once more, hand trembling as she reaches for the handle, and from the other side, just at the edge of hearing, she thinks she hears a soft, rhythmic creak, like the gentle rocking of a bed, waiting for its next visitor. Eliza stood frozen at the door, the faint creaking seeping through the crack where the wood had splintered away from the frame, a slow, patient sound like the house breathing in the dark. Her fingers hovered over the tarnished handle, the chill from the metal bleeding into her skin before she even touched it, and somewhere deep inside her, a voice whispered that she should turn back, flee down the stairs and out into the night. But something stronger, something older, seemed to catch her by the bones and pull her forward. The handle turned with a sigh, and the door swung inward on shrieking hinges, revealing the room beyond, bathed in the pale wash of the full moon. The bed sitting exactly where it had always been, but now the blankets were smooth and tucked in tightly, as if someone had just finished making it, as if it had been expecting her. The candle in her hand trembled violently, and for a moment she thought it might go out, leaving her alone with the waiting darkness. But the flame clung stubbornly to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the warped floorboards, and in that dim light, she could see something she hadn't noticed before. Small marks scratched into the wood around the bed, deep gouges as if someone had tried to claw their way free. Her throat tightened, the air thick and metallic, but still she stepped forward, one slow footfall at a time, her heart thudding so loudly it was a wonder the bed didn't rise up and swallow her whole. And as she moved closer, the air around the bed grew colder, the candle sputtering against an unseen breath, that seemed to emanate from the mattress itself. She reached out once more, fingertips brushing the edge of the blanket, and this time the bed responded. A shiver passed through the frame, a ripple moving across the fabric as though a hand beneath the covers had stirred, waiting for her touch. Eliza stumbled back with a strangled gasp, nearly dropping the candle, and as she caught herself against the doorframe, she realized the creaking had stopped, replaced by an awful, heavy silence, a silence that seemed to lean against her, pushing her out of the room, away from the bed. She slammed the door shut, the sound echoing down the empty hallways, and fled down the stairs, the house groaning and shifting around her like a thing roused from slumber. She didn't stop until she was outside, the cold night air burning her lungs, the stars overhead watching silently, impassively. She didn't sleep that night or the next, and yet the dreams came all the same. Dreams of the orchard bleeding into rot, of the sky above it tearing open into endless blackness, and always the bed, standing proud and patient among the ruins, its sheets rippling as unseen hands reached out for her, beckoning, begging. By the fourth night, exhaustion wore down her fear into something brittle and cracked, and though she told herself she would not go back upstairs, she found herself wandering the halls after midnight, the candle clutched tightly in her shaking hand, its light barely enough to push back the thick, creeping shadows that seemed to ooze from the walls themselves. She didn't remember climbing the stairs, didn't remember crossing the threshold, but suddenly she was there, standing once again before the bed, the room unnaturally cold, the candle flickering wildly as though caught in a wind she could not feel. The bed looked different now. The carvings on the headboard seemed deeper, angrier, the mattress sunken slightly in the middle, as if it bore the invisible weight of something lying in wait. And this time, she could hear it clearly, a faint, wet breathing coming from under the covers, slow and rhythmic, matching the rapid pounding of her heart. Eliza took a step forward, and then another, unable to stop herself, her bare feet whispering against the dusty floorboards, the air so cold now that her breath came out in thick clouds, hanging around her face like a shroud. And when she reached the side of the bed, she saw it, a hand, pale and thin, with fingers far too long, curling out from under the blanket and resting gently against the edge of the mattress. She clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream, the candle almost slipping from her grasp, and before she could move, the hand twitched, the fingers flexing slowly, almost lazily, before sliding back under the blanket as if whatever lay beneath was simply adjusting itself, getting comfortable. A voice rose up then, not from the room, but from inside her own head, low and patient, a whisper that seemed to come from behind her eyes. "Lie down." The words slithered through her mind, thick with promise and hunger, and with a jolt she realized her knees were bending, her body sinking toward the bed without her permission, her muscles heavy and numb, as though she were sinking into quicksand. With a wrenching effort, she tore herself backward, stumbling into the nightstand and sending the candle crashing to the floor, plunging the room into utter blackness. And in that darkness, the bed shifted again. The sound of something rising, something unfolding itself from the mattress with a slow, deliberate grace. Eliza fled, blind and gasping, crashing into walls and furniture as she fled down the stairs, the house seeming to close in around her, the stairwell twisting impossibly long, the front door receding further and further away with every desperate step she took. When she finally burst out into the night, the house at her back groaned, a deep, satisfied sound that vibrated through the earth beneath her feet, and she didn't stop running until the house was nothing more than a shadow against the horizon. The memory of that cold, waiting bed burned into her mind like a brand. The next morning, she packed a bag with trembling hands, her decision made. But when she tried to leave Marrow's End, she found the roads twisted and unfamiliar. Landmarks vanished as if swallowed whole. And no matter how far she drove, every path, every broken road, led her back to the crumbling house and the orchard beyond. It was as if the bed had decided, the way a spider decides when to tighten its web, and Eliza was caught fast in its threads, her struggles only making the unseen bonds pull tighter, deeper, drawing her back toward the place she was no longer strong enough to resist. And far away, in the third-floor room, the bed waited, still and patient, knowing that sooner or later, everyone lays down. The days began to fold into each other like pages in a book she could no longer close. Each morning Eliza woke with the taste of dust in her mouth and the weight of the bed pressing against the back of her mind. And no matter how fiercely she fought to stay away from the house, from that room, something unseen tugged at her, a silent thread wrapped tight around her heart, pulling, pulling. At first she tried to reason it away, told herself it was exhaustion, anxiety, that the mind could play cruel tricks when fear took root too deep. But even as she said the words aloud, they crumbled into nothing against the unshakable certainty that she was being watched, not just from the house but from the inside out, as if a part of her had already lain down upon that waiting bed, had already been claimed. The townsfolk of Marrow's End watched her with wary, pitying eyes, muttering behind half-closed doors when she passed by, none of them offering help, none of them daring to speak the warnings that hung like a fog around the town, for they had seen it before. Newcomers who thought they could outwalk the hunger that lived in that old house, who thought courage and logic could fend off things born of darkness and waiting. On the fifth night, Eliza locked every door and window, blocked them with heavy furniture, lit every candle she could find until the house glowed like a beacon against the starving night. But still, as the clock in the hallway struck midnight, she heard it, soft and sure, the rhythmic creak of the bed rocking upstairs, the floorboards sighing under a weight unseen, inviting her once again. The sound grew louder with each passing hour, a pulse that seeped into the walls, the floors into her own trembling bones. And though she pressed her hands over her ears, the bed's call found her all the same, not in noise but in thought, worming into her mind like ivy through a crumbling wall. "It's time," the voice whispered, warm and close, as if someone were leaning down over her shoulder, breathing into her ear. Tears stung her eyes as she clutched the arms of the chair she had wedged herself into, but her body betrayed her, legs uncoiling slowly, muscles moving not by her own will, but by the will of the house, of the bed, her feet dragging her toward the staircase she had sworn never to climb again. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air growing colder, denser, filled with the thick, coppery scent of something too old and too deep to name. And though she tried to fight it, her hand reached out and brushed the railing, the wood slick and pulsing under her fingertips like a living thing. The hallway at the top was darker than before, as if the shadows themselves had grown teeth, and when she reached the door to the room, it was already open. The bed bathed in a pale, sickly light that seemed to rise not from the moon, but from the bed itself, as if it exhaled its own glow. And there, standing at the foot of the bed, was a figure, its form shifting and indistinct, like a coat of smoke caught in a current of unseen wind. But even though she couldn't see its face, she knew it was smiling, knew it had been waiting for her all along. Lie down, the voice urged, louder now, richer, layered with something almost gentle, almost kind. And against every scream in her mind, Eliza felt herself moving forward, the floorboards creaking beneath her weight in perfect rhythm with the breathing of the bed. As she approached, she saw the mattress ripple again, the covers lifting slightly as if offering a space, a hollow just her size, and the closer she got, the more the air thickened. Every breath a battle, every heartbeat a drumbeat against the inevitable. Her hand brushed the edge of the mattress, and the feeling was not dust or fabric, but something slick and warm, pulsing softly, eagerly, and as she recoiled, the figure at the foot of the bed took a step closer, its shape solidifying for just a moment. A face twisted into something that might have once been human, might have once known love or fear, now hollowed out and yearning. You were always meant to, it whispered, and the sound of it broke something inside her, the something fragile and final. With a desperate cry, she tore herself backward, stumbling into the dresser, sending old glass crashing to the floor, the sharp sound ringing through the thick dark, and for the first time, the figure at the foot of the bed recoiled, its smoky form flickering, shuddering. Seizing the moment, Eliza fled again, her feet finding the stairs, her hands tearing at the shadows that seemed to reach for her, and she didn't stop until she burst out into the night, gasping, trembling. She ran through the orchard now wild and twisted, through fields that seemed to stretch endlessly into the fog, branches clawing at her hair and clothes, the earth itself tilting and spinning beneath her feet, until finally she collapsed beside the broken stone bridge at the town's edge. Behind her, in the distance, the house loomed, a black silhouette against a sickly orange sky, and from its highest window, she could still feel the bed's patient hunger reaching out across the miles. Eliza wept then, not from fear, but from the bone-deep certainty that she was already lost, already claimed, that no matter how far she ran, she would always hear the bed's summons, louder with every heartbeat, closer with every breath. And in the fields beyond, hidden by the creeping mist, unseen figures stirred, turning their hollow faces toward her, drawn by the same call, by the same hunger that would never, ever let her go. The days that followed blurred into a gray, endless smear, Eliza's world shrinking down to the battered stone bridge and the thin strip of dead grass that surrounded it. She didn't dare go back into town, didn't dare wander too far into the fields, where shapes twisted and murmured just beyond the reach of her blurred vision. The only thing that anchored her to herself was the sound of her own breathing and the cold, rough stone under her fingers. Every night, as darkness pressed down like a living thing, she would hear it again, the soft, rhythmic creaking of the bed, impossibly loud even at this distance, threading through the mist and silence, like a needle pulling a stitch, and always the whisper, low and patient and filled with a terrible sweetness. Lie down. At first she resisted with every ounce of strength she had left, clamping her hands over her ears, whispering nonsense to herself to drown it out. But the bed's call was not something that could be ignored. It seeped into her dreams, into her waking thoughts, painting every corner of her mind with its endless, terrible longing. The other townsfolk avoided the bridge now, crossing themselves and muttering prayers when they passed too close. their faces tight with fear and resignation. They knew the signs, had seen it before. Those who resisted for too long, who stayed too near, who thought themselves stronger than the house's hunger, they never lasted. Not really. One evening, as the sun bled away into a bruised purple sky, an old woman approached her, hunched and wrapped in a tattered shawl, her eyes milky with age but burning with a fierce, desperate sorrow. "You can't run from it, child," the woman rasped, her voice scraping like dry leaves. Eliza shook her head violently, backing away, but the woman only shuffled closer, her gnarled hand reaching out as if to catch a falling thing. "It's not the house," she whispered, "not the bed. It's what waits inside. It's older than this town, older than dreams." And then without another word, the woman turned and hobbled back into the mist, swallowed whole by the gathering night, leaving Eliza alone once more, with an echo of her warning still ringing in her ears. That night, she didn't fight, not fully. When the pull began again, her body aching with a tiredness that no sleep could touch, her mind fraying at the edges like an old worn cloth, she rose from the cold ground and began walking, each step slow and deliberate, as if marching toward her own unmaking. The road back to the house was different this time, longer, narrower, the trees on either side bending low as if whispering secrets she could almost hear, the wind carrying snatches of laughter, of weeping, of something that sounded horrifyingly like her own voice calling from far away. When the house finally emerged from the mist, it looked larger than before, its windows yawning open like mouths gasping for air, its roof sagging low like tired shoulders. And through the open front door, she could see it, the staircase stretching upward, impossibly steep, impossibly long, leading straight to the room where the bed waited. Inside, the house was colder than the grave, the candle she carried sputtering weakly against the dark that pressed in from every side. And with every step she climbed, she felt the house shifting around her, closing in, tightening its grip. At the top of the stairs, the door to the room hung open, swinging gently as if breathing, and within the gloom she could make out the bed, larger now, the headboard towering high enough to scrape the ceiling, the mattress sunken deep, and on it, something stirred beneath the covers, something that turned toward her even though it had no eyes to see. Eliza hesitated at the threshold, her mind a frantic blur of half-formed prayers and useless bargains. But the bed called to her, not with words now, but with need, raw and terrible, a gravity she could no longer escape. The figure at the foot of the bed was there again too, clearer now. A woman, or something that had once been a woman, her face hollow and sagging, her mouth stretched wide in a broken, gaping grin, her hands outstretched, beckoning, welcoming. "Come home," it crooned, voice shuddering with longing and despair. Eliza stepped into the room, the air folding in around her like thick, sticky fog, her knees buckling under the weight of it. And as she stumbled forward, the floor seemed to breathe, swelling and sinking beneath her feet, carrying her closer to the bed. The sheets stirred once more, parting slightly as if inviting her in. And the figure at the foot of the bed knelt low, bowing its head, murmuring words she couldn't understand, but that filled her with a sorrow so vast it threatened to drown her. She reached out, her hand trembling, fingers brushing the blanket, and the bed shuddered, a deep, rumbling purr of satisfaction rolling through the room, the mattress shifting eagerly as if to embrace her, and then A voice, sharp and urgent, pierced the haze in her mind. Don't lie down. Eliza jerked her hand back, spinning around to see a man standing in the doorway, wild-eyed, dirt-streaked, his clothes torn and bloodied, his breath coming in ragged gasps. If you lie down, you're theirs forever, he gasped, stumbling into the room. Get away from it. Now. The bed growled, a low, furious sound, the figure at the foot of it hissing like a wounded animal, and the room itself seemed to darken, the walls pressing inward, the floor quaking beneath their feet. The man seized her arm, dragging her bodily away from the bed, and for a moment the mattress rose, something beneath it straining upward, a twisted, many-limbed shape clawing blindly toward her, its mouth gaping wide in a soundless wail of rage and hunger. They ran, crashing through the twisting corridors that seemed to stretch and convulse around them, the house howling with fury, the air filled with the screech of nails on wood, of unseen hands clawing at their clothes, their skin, their very souls. Down the stairs through the shattered doorway, out into the night, the house behind them collapsing inward with a deafening roar, the ground trembling as though the very earth rejected what lay within its crumbling walls. Only when they reached the edge of the orchard did they stop, gasping, shaking, their bodies battered and bruised but alive. For now Eliza turned to the man, her voice a rasping whisper. "Who are you?" He looked at her with hollow, haunted eyes and said, "Someone who escaped once, but it never stops calling." And somewhere behind them, from the smoking ruins of the house, they heard it. The slow, patient creaking of a bed that waits for no one. The night thickened around them, a cold, damp blanket pressing against their skin. And though the house lay in ruins behind them, its jagged silhouette bleeding into the mist, Eliza knew in her bones that it wasn't over, not even close. The bed's call hadn't been silenced, only shifted, moved somewhere deeper, somewhere closer. The man, who had not yet given his name, motioned for her to follow, leading her through the tangled orchard paths, past trees that seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches rattling softly against each other like skeletal hands applauding some unseen performance. They didn't speak, each step weighed down by the knowledge that speaking aloud might somehow wake things slumbering just beneath the surface of this night. Things drawn to sound, to hope, to the heartbeat of those who dared still breathe. After what felt like hours, they stumbled into a clearing, the stars hidden by a thick quilt of fog, and there in the center sat the ruins of an old well, its stones cracked and swallowed by moss, a heavy wooden cover bolted across its mouth. The man collapsed against the stones, his chest heaving, his face hollowed by exhaustion and fear, and after a long moment he spoke, his voice hoarse. "It started here, long before the house, before the town even had a name," he said, his eyes distant, as if seeing through layers of time. "The bed, it's not just a thing, it's a doorway, a bridge for something that should never have been invited in." Eliza sank to the ground beside him, hugging her knees to her chest, the cold of the earth soaking into her bones. "What does it want?" she whispered, though a part of her already knew, had felt it in the way the bed had reached for her, in the way it had offered a place so perfectly shaped to her size, to her emptiness. The man smiled grimly. "It wants you to lie down, to surrender, to give it permission to take you." He ran a trembling hand through his hair. "Once you do, it feeds. It grows stronger. And you don't just die. You become part of it." The memory of the hollow figure at the foot of the bed flashed before her eyes, the broken face, the desperate hands, and bile rose in her throat. "Why me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why anyone?" The man's gaze met hers, heavy with things unsaid. "Because we're weak. Because sometimes when life cracks us open, there are things waiting to crawl inside." The wind stirred the fog around them, carrying with it a low, almost inaudible whisper, a sound like a lullaby sung in a language older than memory, and both of them froze, listening. The man stood abruptly, fear flashing across his face. "It's moving," he hissed. "It's looking for a new resting place. It's not done with you, Eliza." She didn't remember telling him her name, but somehow it didn't matter. Here, names felt thin and useless, like trying to wrap yourself in smoke to keep warm. They set off again, this time following the old stone path that wound deeper into the forest beyond the town, their footsteps muffled by the creeping moss that blanketed the ground, the trees closing in tighter, their bark splitting open in places to reveal deep, gaping wounds that wept a dark, tar-like sap. As they walked, the man told her about others, about the hollow-eyed travelers who came to Marrow's End, about the ones who had laid down willingly, thinking it was just a bed, just a place to rest, and who had woken up on the other side of something that wore their faces but carried none of their souls. "I fought it once," he said softly, "years ago. I thought I had beaten it, but no one escapes forever." Ahead, through the mist, a shape loomed. A crumbling church, its steeple cracked and leaning precariously to one side, its windows smashed out like hollow, weeping eyes. "This is the only place it fears," the man said, leading her inside. For now, the air inside the church was different, thinner, sharper, filled with the bitter tang of old prayers and broken promises. The pews were rotted and overturned, the altar cracked down the center, but still some faint echo of sanctity clung to the stones. They huddled in the shadows, wrapping themselves in tattered robes left behind by whoever had once worshipped here. And for a while there was silence, broken only by the sound of their breathing and the occasional distant creak that made the hairs on the back of Eliza's neck stand on end. She didn't sleep, couldn't, but she drifted, hovering in that strange twilight between waking and dreaming, where the world feels thin and brittle. And it was there, in that fragile place, that she heard it again. Not the bed creaking this time, but a soft, slow shuffle, as of bare feet moving across stone. Closer, closer. The man sat up sharply, his face bloodless, his hand tightening around a rusted iron rod he had scavenged from the ruins. "It found us," he breathed. From the broken doorway, a figure stepped inside, moving with that same fluid, boneless grace she had seen before. And though it wore a human shape, something was terribly wrong, its limbs too long, its head tilting at an unnatural angle, its face a featureless mask of stretched gray skin. And behind it, in the mist, more shapes gathered, silent and patient, their presence a thick, suffocating wave of dread. Eliza rose to her feet, every muscle screaming in protest. "What do we do?" she whispered. The man turned to her, his eyes shining with a fierce, desperate light. "We make a choice," he said. "Fight to stay awake, or lie down and let it take us." The first figure reached the threshold of the church, pausing just before crossing it, as if held back by some unseen force, its head twitching with an insect-like jerk, sensing, calculating, waiting. The ground beneath their feet rumbled softly, a low vibration that grew stronger with every heartbeat, and from the darkened woods beyond, the unmistakable sound of creaking wood echoed. Slow, steady, and filled with ancient hunger. The bed was coming. And this time, it wasn't waiting in one place. The floor trembled beneath Eliza's feet as the sound of wood grinding against stone grew louder, closer, filling the ancient church with a dreadful vibration that rattled the broken stained glass in its frames. The rotted pews groaning as if waking from a long, bitter sleep, and somewhere beyond the thick mist still clinging to the doorways, Eliza caught a glimpse of it. The bed, moving not on legs or wheels but dragging itself forward, gouging deep scars into the ground, pulled by unseen, whispering forces. The faceless figure at the threshold twitched again, its head snapping sideways with a sickening crack. And then, with terrible slowness, it lifted one elongated hand and placed it against the broken wood of the doorway. And a shudder ran through the entire building, like the church itself recoiling from the touch. Beside her, the man gripped the rusted iron rod so tightly his knuckles whitened, his breath coming fast and shallow. "It's testing the boundary," he rasped. "The church is old, but its sanctity is thin. If it pushes hard enough—" He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. The walls around them groaned in protest, the heavy stones seeming to sweat beneath the pressure of something vast and unseen pressing against them. "We have to move," Eliza whispered, though she had no idea where they could possibly go. And already the thought of running made her legs feel like lead. The man nodded grimly, scanning the crumbling interior for an exit, and his eyes landed on a half-collapsed door near the altar, almost hidden behind a tangle of fallen beams and debris. Without speaking, they sprinted toward it, the sound of the dragging bed growing louder, more frantic, as if it sensed their intent. The faceless figure letting out a low, guttural moan that vibrated in the pit of Eliza's stomach. They threw themselves against the broken door, splintering it open, and tumbled into a narrow stone corridor that ran beneath the church. The air colder here, denser, filled with the scent of wet earth and rust. Behind them, the groan of splintering wood echoed, and Eliza didn't need to look back to know the bed had reached the church's heart, had found the place where they had tried to hide. They ran, their footsteps slapping against the damp stone, the corridor twisting and sloping downward in a sick, spiraling descent, until it felt as if they were being funneled straight into the bowels of the earth itself. "Where does this go?" Eliza gasped, her voice barely audible over the pounding of blood in her ears. "Old crypts," the man replied between ragged breaths, "buried deeper than the town, maybe deeper than time." It didn't sound like salvation, but it was all they had. The air grew colder the further they descended, the walls slick with moisture. Strange symbols carved into the stone, worn smooth by centuries but still humming faintly with a power that made the fine hairs on Eliza's arms stand on end. Suddenly the corridor opened into a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness, the floor littered with crumbling coffins and bones picked clean by time. And in the center of it all stood another bed. But this one was different from the one that had hunted her above. It was ancient, carved from blackened wood that seemed to absorb the light around it, draped in decaying fabrics that whispered against the stone floor with every unseen breath. Eliza stumbled to a halt, staring in horror. "No," she breathed. "It's already here." The man pulled her behind a broken pillar, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored her own. "Not the same one," he whispered. "This is the first, the original, the seed from which all the others grew." The ground trembled again, and from the tunnel behind them, a new sound emerged. A chorus of soft, dragging footsteps. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The sound of the hollow ones coming, drawn to the call of the master bed. It's a hive, Eliza said, her mind struggling to wrap around the enormity of it. A nest, and it's waking up. The man nodded grimly. We can't outrun it. Not anymore. For a moment, they simply crouched there, the cold of the stones seeping into their skin, their hearts pounding in their ears, the darkness pressing against them like a living thing. Then the man turned to her, his expression hardening. There's a way, he said, but you won't like it. Eliza stared at him, feeling the weight of the bed's gaze even without eyes to see, the sense of something ancient and patient waiting for her to falter. Tell me, she said, her voice steady even as her hands shook. The man licked his cracked lips. You have to lie down. He saw the horror flaring in her eyes and pressed on quickly. Not in surrender, in defiance. If you lie down willingly, but hold on to yourself, your memories, your name, you can fight it from within, seal it again. But it's dangerous. If you slip, even for a moment, it will take you. Eliza looked back at the black bed, its form shifting slightly in the gloom, the tattered canopy stirring as if in anticipation. It was suicide. It was the only chance. Slowly she stood, feeling the weight of every eyeless face behind her, feeling the breath of the hollow ones on her neck, feeling the pulse of the bed like a heartbeat synchronized with her own. Stay here, she told the man, and before he could protest, she stepped out from behind the pillar, walking toward the bed with steps that felt both impossibly heavy and light. The hollow ones watched her silently, their blank faces tilted in unison, their broken bodies swaying slightly, a grotesque mockery of a lullaby's rhythm. The bed welcomed her, its covers peeling back like a mouth opening to receive, and Eliza climbed onto it, the decayed mattress sinking beneath her weight, the smell of rot and sorrow rising around her. She lay back, staring up into the endless dark above, and closed her eyes. At first, there was nothing, just silence, heavy and absolute. Then slowly the whispers began. They came from everywhere and nowhere, 1,000 voices murmuring promises, threats, seductions, and warnings, each one threading its way into her mind, trying to find purchase. You are nothing, one whispered. Rest, give in, be free. But she clung to herself, to the memory of her name, her life, her stubborn will to survive, repeating her name silently like a prayer. A weapon, Eliza. 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 The darkness around her thickened, began to pulse and churn, and she felt the bed shudder beneath her, felt the hollow ones drawing closer, reaching, reaching. A voice deeper and older than the others rumbled up from the core of the bed. You cannot win, it said. You are already mine. But Eliza opened her eyes, and in the darkness, she smiled. Not tonight, she whispered, and then she let go, not of herself but of her fear, pushing it away like a crumbling wall, standing tall inside the storm. Her spirit a burning thread the bed could not touch, could not consume. The bed screamed, not aloud, but in the trembling of the stones, in the shattering of the air itself. And the hollow ones recoiled, their forms flickering and collapsing into ash, the darkness around them unraveling like a torn shroud. The ancient bed cracked down the middle, a spiderweb of light spilling out from within, growing brighter and brighter until Eliza could see nothing else, her body weightless, her mind soaring. And then, silence, a different kind of silence, not heavy, not waiting, just peace. The light faded slowly, like mist thinning at dawn, and when Eliza opened her eyes again, she found herself lying on the cracked stone floor of the crypt. The black bed nothing more than a pile of splintered wood and torn, crumbling fabric, its terrible presence gone, as if it had never been anything more than a bad memory. The air was still cold, but it no longer bit into her skin, no longer carried the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing against her soul. And somewhere in the darkness, she heard the man's voice, raw and trembling. "You did it." Eliza sat up slowly, every bone in her body aching as if she had been through a war fought only in dreams. And she saw him standing a few feet away, leaning heavily against a crumbled pillar, his face pale but his eyes shining with something like awe. "The hive is broken," he said, almost in disbelief. "You broke it." But even as he spoke, Eliza felt a shiver ripple through the ground beneath her, subtle but undeniable, a reminder that not everything had been vanquished, that some echoes were too deep to ever fully silence. She climbed to her feet, steadying herself against the ruined pillar, and looked around. The crypt was still vast and silent, but the oppressive darkness was thinner now, the mist rolling back to reveal long-forgotten archways leading deeper into the earth. The man followed her gaze and grimaced. "It's not over," he said. "It's never just one nest. There's always another, deeper, older." Eliza wiped the sweat and grime from her forehead and nodded grimly. "Then we keep moving." They picked their way carefully across the broken floor, stepping over the remains of ancient coffins and brittle bones, each step taking them farther from the world they had once known and deeper into the cold heart of the forgotten earth. As they moved through one of the archways, the air grew colder still, so cold that every breath crystallized in front of their mouths and the stone walls narrowed around them until they had to walk single file, the ceiling pressing low overhead, the corridor twisted and turned like the intestines of some long-dead beast. And soon the weak light from the upper crypt was nothing but a memory, swallowed whole by the darkness. "What is this place?" Eliza whispered, her voice trembling despite herself. "Older than the town," the man said quietly. "Older than memory. Some say the town was built to seal it in, not the other way around." Eliza shivered, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something that stirred in the marrow of her bones, a sense of ancient, slumbering malice waiting to be disturbed. Finally, the corridor widened into another chamber, this one round and perfectly symmetrical, its walls covered in carvings that seemed to shift and ripple when looked at directly. In the center of the chamber was another bed, but this one was different again. It wasn't wood or metal or anything earthly, but something smoother, darker, like a shard of midnight given form, pulsing faintly with a sickly reddish glow, as if it had veins buried beneath its surface. And around the bed stood 12 figures, statues carved from the same unnatural material, each one frozen in a posture of reaching, grasping, begging, their mouths open in silent screams. The man cursed under his breath. "We shouldn't be here. This is where it began." Eliza felt her heart hammering against her ribs, a primal warning screaming through her blood. But she stepped forward anyway, drawn by a force she couldn't resist. As she approached the bed, she saw that something lay atop it, a bundle of cloth, tattered and ancient, and within it something small and fragile, a child, or what was left of one. Its face was hidden, but its tiny hands clutched at the air, twitching weakly, as if caught between life and death, between dream and nightmare. forever reaching for something just out of reach. The moment Eliza's shadow fell across it, the child's hand stilled, and a voice, ancient, broken, but unmistakably alive, whispered from the folds of the cloth, "Lie down, with me." Eliza staggered back, horror surging through her, but the statues around the bed shifted, their stone arms creaking as they moved, slowly turning their heads toward her, their hollow eyes locking onto hers. "Don't listen," the man shouted, grabbing her arm. "It's the source. It wants to pull you into its dream." But the pull was immense, a gravity that tugged not at her body, but at her very soul. And Eliza knew with bone-deep certainty that if she touched the bed, if she even laid a finger upon it, she would be lost, not dead but worse, trapped, sleeping forever in a dream that had no end, no mercy, no light. "We have to destroy it," she said through gritted teeth, "before it wakes fully." But how? The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small, jagged shard of glass, its surface etched with symbols that hurt to look at. "It's not much," he said, "but it's real. It can cut through dreams, maybe even through this." Eliza took the shard with trembling fingers, feeling it hum against her skin, and turned back to the bed, where the child thing writhed weakly, its whispers growing louder, more desperate. "Please, stay, forever." With a cry that was half fury, half terror, Eliza plunged the shard into the bed's surface, expecting resistance. But the glass slid in like a knife through soft, rotten fruit. The bed let out a soundless scream, a vibration that shook the chamber to its foundations, and the statues around it crumbled into dust, their open mouths shattering in final, silent agony. The child thing evaporated, a mist of sorrow and lost time swirling away into nothingness, and the bed cracked apart, releasing a rush of cold air so pure and fierce it drove Eliza and the man to their knees. When the air cleared, the bed was gone. Only the broken circle of dust and the fading echo of ancient grief remained. They sat there for a long time, gasping, trembling, listening to the silence, waiting for some new horror to rise. But none came, not yet. "It's over," Eliza whispered at last, her voice hollow, disbelieving. The man stared at the empty space where the bed had been, his eyes distant, haunted. "This nest," he said slowly, "maybe, but the dream never ends. It just moves." And far above them, beyond the stone and the earth and the forgotten crypts in the heart of the abandoned town, another bed stirred in its sleep. The world above felt different now, but Eliza couldn't quite place why. The streets were empty, eerily so. Not a soul in sight, not even the stray dogs or birds that usually cluttered the air. The town felt abandoned, untouched by time, but also untouched by life. As she and the man made their way back through the hollow streets, the air around them felt too still. There was a sense of waiting, of something large and unseen gathering, tightening like the moments before a storm. But there was no wind, no clouds, just this unbearable silence. It was when they passed the old market square that Eliza saw it. A faint glimmer at the farthest edge of her vision, a flicker of movement, a shadow slipping between the buildings like a breath in the dark. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded, his eyes narrowing. "I did." He didn't say more, but there was something in the way he held himself, as though he were waiting for the ground to fall out from under him. They quickened their pace, the cobblestones underfoot cold and unyielding, and as they neared the corner of the street, Eliza heard the sound again. Soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The dragging of something heavy across stone. She stopped in her tracks, the blood draining from her face. The sound was so familiar, so unmistakable, that it chilled her to the bone. The bed. It was close, closer than it had ever been. "We need to go," Eliza said, her voice tight. The man didn't need any further urging. They turned and fled, their feet pounding on the stone. But no matter how fast they ran, the sound of the dragging bed grew louder, closer. They reached the edge of the square, but there was nowhere to hide. The buildings around them were empty shells, devoid of any protection. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet shuddered violently, and from the direction of the abandoned church, a low groaning sound split the air. Eliza looked up, and there it was, emerging from the shadow of the church. The bed. Not just any bed, but a monstrous thing, larger than any she had seen before. Its frame made of twisted iron and rotting wood. The very air around it warping with the sheer malice of its presence. The hollow figures that had once stalked her now floated behind it, their eyes vacant, their bodies a blur of darkness, as if they were nothing more than an extension of the bed itself. The bed dragged itself across the square, its movements jerky, unnatural, but with a force that was terrifyingly real, the ground trembling with each scraping sound, as though the earth itself were reacting to the nightmare's touch. "It's too late," the man said, his voice filled with resignation. Eliza turned to him. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, the bed stopped, and the shadows around them thickened, pulling in on them like a tightening noose. The man grabbed her arm, his grip fierce. "We have to face it," he said, his eyes dark with the weight of what he knew. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the bed's presence pressing down on her, pushing her to the ground. But she refused to break, refused to bow. "How?" she gasped. "How do we stop it?" The man's gaze darkened. "We don't. We can't. But you can. You're the key. You have to get close to it." Eliza shook her head. "No, I won't let it take me again." "It already has," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the grinding noise of the bed's movement. "Don't you see? You've been part of it since the beginning. You're the one who woke it." The words hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't process the meaning of what he was saying. But then the shadows closed in, and the bed's terrible presence grew closer, its frame creaking, groaning like the slow opening of a crypt. Without thinking, Eliza took a step forward. There was nothing else to do, nothing else to say. The man's warnings, her own fears, none of it mattered anymore. She had already made her choice when she had entered the crypt, when she had faced down the ancient horrors that lay within. And now, with the bed looming over her, its presence as inevitable as death itself, Eliza knew what she had to do. She stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest, her hand reaching out toward the iron frame, feeling the cold energy crackling in the air. As her fingers brushed the surface, the world around her fractured, splintering into 1,000 fragments of pure terror, and the bed screamed, a sound like the universe itself being torn apart. The bed's scream split the air, tearing through the very fabric of reality, and Eliza felt her soul quake, as though the sound was digging into her very core. The shadows around her writhed and twisted, their forms shifting like something alive, something ancient, clawing its way out of the earth itself. Eliza tried to pull her hand away. But it was as though the bed had its own will now, pulling her deeper into its dark heart, and she could feel its pulse, slow and unyielding, beneath the skin of the earth, like a great eternal heartbeat. Eliza. The man's voice cut through the fog of panic that clouded her mind, and she turned her head just in time to see him stumble forward, his face pale and stricken with horror. "Get away from it!" But it was too late. The bed's presence had claimed her, and her vision blurred as the world around her spiraled away into a vortex of darkness. She could hear the man shouting, but his voice was distant now, growing softer with each passing moment, until it faded completely, leaving Eliza alone in the suffocating blackness. Then came the voices, whispers, hundreds, thousands of them, each one a thread weaving its way into her thoughts. "Stay, lie down with us, forever." They beckoned her, soothing, persuasive, promising an end to the pain, a final release. But as she sank deeper into the bed's grip, she could feel it, something deeper, darker, clawing at the edges of her mind. Something was wrong. Something wasn't right. It was the man's voice. She recognized it now, though it was faint, almost drowned by the cacophony of whispers. "You can still wake up. You're the only one who can." But the bed was pulling her deeper, deeper into its infinite abyss. And for a moment, she wondered if the man was real, if any of this was real. "Please, Eliza," the voice urged again, more desperate now, almost frantic. Her eyes fluttered open, or she thought they did. Was she awake? Was this all just a nightmare? Her surroundings seemed to shift, changing constantly. One moment she was lying on the bed, the next she was standing in the middle of a dark, endless forest, the trees towering above her, blocking out all light. She couldn't tell where she was anymore. She couldn't remember who she was. The voices continued to swirl around her, each one a thread, each one a beckoning whisper, urging her to surrender, to close her eyes and give in to the eternal sleep they promised. The bed's cold embrace tightened, and Eliza could feel herself slipping, like a leaf being pulled into a fast-moving river. Her body felt weightless, as if gravity itself had abandoned her. She fought against it. The darkness felt oppressive, heavy, like a weight pressing down on her chest, suffocating her with each passing second. She tried to move, to stand, but her limbs were sluggish, unresponsive. Her breath came in shallow gasps as the whispers around her grew louder, closer, until it felt as though the voices were inside her head, filling her every thought. "You're so close, Eliza. Stay with us," the voices whispered, their tone growing dark and sinister. "We are eternal. We are the forgotten ones. You will never leave us." But then something snapped inside her, a flicker of resistance, a memory of something better, something pure. The whispers faltered, their insistent tug weakening as a distant flicker of light broke through the darkness. It was the man's voice again, now clearer, stronger. "Remember who you are." With that single phrase, Eliza snapped back. The darkness around her fractured like glass, shattering into shards of cold, empty air. The bed's grip loosened, the shadows fading, unable to hold her any longer. Her hands, trembling, reached out and touched the bed once more. But this time, she did not feel its pull. Instead, she felt its coldness, like touching the surface of a forgotten grave. And with a final push, she pulled herself free. The bed screamed again, but this time it was not a scream of triumph, but one of frustration, of rage. Eliza stepped away, her heart pounding in her chest as she stumbled back, trying to steady herself on the uneven ground beneath her. The world around her began to shift again, the forest melting away, the shadows lifting, revealing a vast empty plain. But she wasn't alone. The man was there, standing in the distance waiting for her. His eyes, though still full of sorrow, now carried a flicker of hope. He reached out to her, and for a moment, Eliza hesitated. "You did it," he said softly, his voice carrying across the empty plain. "You broke its hold." But the relief was short-lived. As Eliza looked around, she realized that the bed, the source of all this, was not truly gone. It was there, in the distance, standing tall and imposing, its twisted frame still intact. It wasn't finished. It was never finished. "What now?" Eliza asked, her voice steady but filled with the weight of everything she had just endured. The man's gaze turned dark once more. "Now, we destroy it for good." With those words, he turned and began walking toward the distant bed, and Eliza followed him, the final confrontation looming ahead. The bed waited for them, not as a passive, dormant object, but as a force, as something alive and hungry. The ground beneath their feet shook again, more violently this time, as if the earth itself was struggling against their progress. The closer they got, the more oppressive the air became, suffocating them with the weight of what had come before. The bed's frame seemed to pulse with a sickly, reddish glow, its twisted shape like a scar in the world, a wound that refused to heal. The man didn't slow, but Eliza felt herself faltering, her every instinct screaming to turn back. But there was no turning back now. She reached for the shard of glass again, the jagged piece that had once pierced the other bed, and as her fingers closed around it, she felt a surge of power. Or was it something darker? The bed's screeching whispers reached her ears once more, its voice growing louder, angrier. "You cannot destroy what was never meant to be destroyed." But Eliza stood firm, her heart steady. "I will." With one final defiant step, she plunged the shard into the bed's twisted frame, and the world stopped. For a brief moment, there was silence. Not the heavy, oppressive silence that had come before, but a weightless, peaceful silence. But then the bed exploded. A rush of dark energy burst outward, consuming everything in its path. The man screamed, and Eliza felt herself being thrown backward, the force of the explosion tearing through her, pushing her into a dark, endless void. The bed was gone. The nightmare was gone. And yet, as Eliza fell into the abyss, she realized the truth. It was never truly gone. It had only been waiting. Eliza's fall was slow, as though the very air around her was holding her suspended in time. The explosion of dark energy had shattered everything she knew, sending her spiraling into nothingness. She felt weightless, adrift in a sea of dark shadows that seemed to stretch on forever, a void that swallowed every piece of light she had ever known. There was no sound here, no whispers, no voices, just silence, absolute and profound. Her thoughts drifted like leaves on a river, lost to the endless flow of darkness. And yet, somewhere deep inside her, a nagging feeling lingered. The bed was still waiting. It had never truly left. She felt the weight of its presence, even in this endless void, like a pressure pushing against her chest, constricting her breath. The bed was there, somewhere, its hollow form lurking in the shadows, waiting to consume her once more. But then something shifted. In the distance, a faint light appeared, flickering like a star in the infinite night. Eliza's heart skipped a beat as she saw it, her first sign of hope in what felt like an eternity. She reached out instinctively, her fingers stretching toward the light. And with every inch she drew closer, the air around her grew warmer, the shadows retreating. The man's voice echoed in her mind once more. You can't escape it, Eliza. Not entirely. The words sent a shiver down her spine. The bed had already taken so much from her. It had claimed her once before, and now it would not rest until it had her completely. But as the light grew brighter, a realization settled over her. She didn't need to escape the bed entirely. She needed to face it once and for all. She was the one who had awoken it. She had been the one to call it into being, to release its dark power into the world. But she was also the one who could end it. The light was close now, within arm's reach. Eliza didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, and as her hand touched the light, the world around her shattered like glass, the darkness splitting into thousands of tiny fragments. And there it was, the bed. Not in the distance anymore, but right in front of her. The twisted frame stood tall and menacing, its shadow casting a dark pall over the ground, its presence suffocating the air around them. The voices rose again, soft at first, then louder until they were a deafening chorus, all calling her name. Eliza! But she wasn't afraid anymore. She reached for the shard of glass, the one she had once used to pierce the bed's frame, the one that had seemed to hold so much power. It felt heavier now, as though it had been waiting for this moment too. She raised it high, ready to strike, but the bed's presence shifted. It pulsed as though it were alive, its frame cracking open with a sound like thunder. From within the dark, twisted wood, shadowy figures began to emerge, their faces hauntingly familiar. They were the lost souls, the ones who had succumbed to the bed before her. And then she saw him, the man. His form was twisted, like the others, his eyes empty, his face frozen in a silent scream. Eliza's heart ached for him, for all of them. But this was it. She could not allow the bed to claim any more lives, not even his. With a cry of defiance, Eliza drove the shard into the bed's center. The frame screamed as the glass pierced it, the sound deafening, like the cracking of the world itself. And then, in one final burst of energy, the bed collapsed. The world around Eliza spun wildly, the shadows twisting, the whispers fading, and for the first time since all of this began, there was silence, a deep, peaceful silence. The weight in her chest lifted, the darkness receded, and the man's twisted form vanished into the air, his scream swallowed by the void. The other souls faded, their restless existence now at an end. The bed was gone. Eliza stood alone in the silence, the remnants of the nightmare dissolving around her. She was standing in a meadow bathed in soft moonlight. The air was cool, fresh, free from the oppressive weight of darkness that had once surrounded her. She could still feel the lingering presence of the bed, faint but ever present, as though its shadow would follow her for the rest of her life. But she was free, for now. In the distance, she saw a figure approaching, but this time, it wasn't the man from before. It was a woman, her face serene, her eyes filled with understanding. Eliza didn't speak, but the woman's gaze held her, as if she had known all along that Eliza was the one who had to carry the weight of the story. The woman smiled gently, and with a nod she turned away, disappearing into the mist. Eliza looked around once more, feeling a strange sense of peace. The bed, the nightmares, the horrors, they were gone, at least for now. But the bed's whispers would never leave her completely, because some things are never truly finished. As she turned to walk away, the wind picked up, carrying with it a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a dragging, scraping noise. The bed wasn't finished, and it would wait.